And welcome to my mad scientific laboratory. Now, just a few little dad jokes just to start us off in what may be the element of surprise. How often do scientists check the element table? Periodically. They're not going to get much better. My favorite element is helium. I can't speak highly enough of it. And why must aspiring ninjas study the periodic table? To master the element of surprise. Well, if you haven't gathered already, the key word here is elements, okay? And we're going to study this a lot in operations management. So I look forward to seeing you about elements of operations management in our next slide. Hello and welcome to our lesson on Unit 3, Outcome 3, and it's about the key elements. That's the key word here, the key element of an operations system. Okay, so taken from the study design, the key word here is elements of an operations system. And we're going to look at these three parts here, inputs, processes, and outputs. Okay, I think we've already established that I like cakes. I also like chocolate. Okay, so and maybe some of you share the same feeling about it. So if we think about it here, this word called elements, we're going to see, and you have to get it absolutely into your head. What we're talking about here is the inputs, processes, and outputs. So whenever you hear that word again, okay, whether you see it in a SAC, whether you see it in an assessment task, homework task, class task, end of year exam, you want to trigger a reaction. So elements has to be inputs, process, outputs. We've even got it over here, IPO, inputs, process, outputs. So to make our chocolate bar, here is our lovely chocolates. Oh, yum. Okay, that's our output. That's what we're going to walk away from the business. So the output is we walk away from. What goes into making the chocolate bar? Well, this is our cocoa bean. Okay, so here is our input. Our raw material is the input. We're going to do certain things to it to transform it into our output. So the process is the transformational bit, whether it's been mixing or blending the cocoa bean and the cocoa mass to make the chocolate bar. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at here. But the most important thing, elements, again, triggers off a reaction from you to go inputs, processes, outputs. Well done. Okay, so let's break down these three parts now. So elements has to have a reaction of inputs, process, outputs. Let's look at inputs first. So the inputs are all the resources that go into producing our good or service. Okay, so let's just take a couple of pictures here and see if we can make the connection. So we've got a little factory here with some robots and we've got some people making boxes. Okay, we've also got our lovely chocolate again. So let's see if we can make the connection. So what are the types of resources that go into this? Okay, our first category is labor resources. Okay, these are the people that could be working to make our product. So the human resources, their skills and effort is the labor resource. So within here, we can see our workers working on the factory line, helping to produce the item that we're going to produce here. So here we have our workers working to produce the boxes. Okay. If you imagine the same thing would occur in making the chocolate bar, you might have your chefs, or you're going to be having the specialist chocolate makers in a fine cocoa black type store. Okay, so those are the people, that's your employees, that's your labor. You need that for the product. Your next category is natural resources. Okay, these are the things that come from the land, such as raw materials. So in here, we can see the hazelnuts. We can see the cocoa bean paste. We can see eggs and some milk. They're going to go in as the raw materials. These are our natural resources that come from the land. In here, we can see the cardboard, which is going to come from timber pulped up. Okay, so that's our raw material that's coming in as natural resources. This next category, capital resources. Okay, now that word might spin you out a little bit, but capital in here is referring to buildings, machinery, equipment, component parts. Okay, so we're not talking about money. Sometimes the word capital gets associated with money. Okay, this is broader than that. These are our capital resources, the machinery, the equipment, the buildings. So we think of this first scenario here, we've got robots. They would be our capital resources. We've got these machines involved in here. They're the resources. We've also got the whole factory. So the factory itself classifies as a capital resource in here. Within here, our capital resources are probably going to be these like sort of nut crusher devices. So we have the blender for blending the chocolates and also probably a fridge to then set the product in the end. Okay, so that's all our equipment, component parts, and also in this case here, the cafe or the chocolate shop that's making the product. So we've got those resources. We've also got the entrepreneurial ideas and the time. Okay, that goes in that. Those are all inputs, but the three main categories we want to focus on is the labor, natural, and capital resources that go in to making a good or service. Now, also while I'm here, I just want to make a link. You're going to hear this word resources again in Unit 4, Area Study 2, when we talk about redeploying or using resources differently. So using our natural resources in a different way, labor resources or capital resources. So keep that word in mind for the future. Okay, then our next part of the elements is processes, okay? Now, the processes are what is done to the inputs that we covered in the previous slide to transform them into a finished output. So if we take our cocoa bean scenario and our chocolate bar, we've got the raw cocoa bean, that's the input, okay? When we melt it, mix it, blend it, pouring, setting, checking, and packaging, all of those are processes that we're doing to convert it into our output of a lovely set of chocolates here. Okay, so the doing words, what we're doing to transform it is the processes. So I often say to my students here that these doing words, these verbs are the processes. Mixing, melting, blending, packaging, those type of words is what we're doing to it to transform it into the output. Okay, and the final of the three elements is the output. Okay, now the output is that final product presented to the customer, either as goods, we've talked about those before, tangible, or services intangible. So this is what you walk away with, okay? This is the output. This is what you make that you then sell to the customer, okay? So it can either be the end consumer, me eating that chocolate bar, or it could be if you're a business operating and supplying another company with their raw materials. So imagine if you were a steering wheel manufacturer for the car industry, when you make that steering wheel and send it off to your Mitsubishis or Toyotas, etc., they are the end producer of that car. Okay, so you've just got that role to play. So then think of it as the output is that final good that you finish your business's production with. Okay, whether it be a good or a service. So in this example here we have our lovely good. Okay, it's something that's tangible. Okay, so remember, tangible is an output that can be physically touched. I can touch that good. I can eat those chocolates. Okay, so that's going to be the good. But equally, output can be a service. We've mentioned before about Edrolo being hopefully a service to you. You're learning knowledge. It's passing through. We can't touch it. It's just happening, that transfer of information. So we can't physically touch it, but we're experiencing it. Another example, obviously, is flights, okay? If you're flying from here to Bali, okay, on a lovely holiday, that's the experience, is you getting there. You can't touch what's happening in the flight, okay? You're just experiencing the journey, okay? So it could be a good or a service that's going to be the output from a production. Okay, let's work through a worked example of how this might appear in either a SAC or an examination question. So the question asks us to identify first and then outline. So remember, take these keywords, identify, just literally state it, okay, and outline a very brief overview of what the elements are. So remember, the key elements, inputs, process, outputs, keep going. Elements, inputs, process, outputs. That's what we're looking for here, okay? Operation system. So clearly, when we've got 3 marks, we can almost think, okay, we've got to identify and outline the inputs, then the processes and the outputs for the full 3 marks together. So again, let's scaffold that through. So first of all, we start off by telling the examiner, telling the assessor, here are our elements. We know what we're on about. There are inputs, process, and outputs. That's our identify. Tick, okay? Now, let's outline them, a little bit of detail, not just state them, a little bit. Okay, so inputs are the resources that go into producing a good or service. The raw materials, component parts, labor, time, machinery, enterprise buildings, etc. Okay, nice brief overview. The same then for processes. So these are what we're going to do to transform our inputs and turn them into outputs. And then for our outputs, okay, this is going to be the final product presented to the customer, either as a good, tangible, or as a service, intangible. This could be either to the end consumer or to another business if the output is a component of their good or service. Okay, nice brief overview, 3 marks in the bag. Well done. Okay, so let's bring all of this together with some worked examples in the contemporary business case studies we could use in assessment tasks. So again, let's take our 3 key elements. Okay, inputs. Okay, what goes into making the product. So this is our raw materials, the time, the machinery, the capital resources, the natural resources, etc. The process, what are we doing to it to transform it into our output? What are we walking away from this experience, whether it's going to be a good, tangible, we can touch, or a service, intangible, that we're going to experience. So let's think of ourselves here for the sole trader. We've got a florist, lovely, making the flowers. Okay, so what goes into that? What do we start off with as inputs to make those bouquets of flowers? So here we have, obviously, flowers, ribbon, florist, shop, till, entrepreneurship. So we have, okay, natural resources going on involved here. We also have the labour resource coming along here, and here we have the capital resource. So those elements that come into it. Then if we think about walking away, what are we walking away with? Well, it's going to be a good. We're going to walk away with a bouquet of flowers. Also, hopefully, there's a bit of a service here as well. So we can have both in the same scenario here with that delivery of flowers. Say you had asked for a delivery to be sent to a customer. When they receive that, oh, I'm very grateful. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, the delivery could be part of that service for that customer experience. So what are we doing to get it from here to here? What are the doing words? Well, we're cutting the flowers. We're arranging the flowers. And in this case here, we're delivering the flowers to the customer. That's our processes. The same can be done if we take the next business type, partnerships. So let's give an example of an accounting firm. Okay, let's start at the other end. What do you go to an accounting firm for? Well, hopefully to have a service. So what are we walking away from in this one here? Well, hopefully a completed tax return for the ATO. Okay, so we're looking there for the accountant to help do that for us. That's the service we're asking for. So what do they use for their inputs? Well, they're going to have the computers. That's going to be their capital resource. Here's their labour, the accountants with specialised knowledge in that industry, and they're going to use the time to put together my tax return for me. Now, what are they going to do with all those receipts and bits of paper that I give them? Well, they're going to do some record keeping, checking, and then they'll lodge the return for me. So that's how they're going to hopefully get me to that point there. The same for that next type of business, a private limited company. We've talked about VCE before in terms of the recycling component that they do. So they recycle paper. Okay, that's the output that's going to come from it. So what's going into that in the first place? The recycled paper, we've got the pulping machinery, the factory, and the workers. So again, we've got labour resource here, we've got the capital resource going on, and we've got the natural resource, the raw material that's coming in and needs to be converted. So what are we doing to transform it into this recycled paper? Yes, we're recycling it, we're pulping it, and we're packaging it. Okay, again, the doing action verbs to convert the input into the output. Again, you can see the connection here. We're going further along. So a public listed company, let's say we were Qantas. What are you hopefully experiencing from the flight? What's the output? Well, hopefully a safe and enjoyable flight that you as a customer have experienced. What are they putting into that? Well, they need the plane in the first place, the pilot, the crew, the food, and the airport. Again, we have our capital resources in here. We have our natural resource, and we also have our labour resources as our inputs. What are we doing to those? Well, we're converting them into this by flying, by serving and making the food, and providing entertainment while you're on the flight, so you actually have a lovely experience. A social enterprise like Thank You, making the shampoos and the conditioners, okay? We're ending up with either the water bottle or the shampoos conditioner. That's a tangible good that we're walking away with. Okay, so what is coming into it? The bottles, the water, the marketing team, and the trucks. Okay, again, we've got the labour, we've got capital resources in here, and we've also got natural resources. And what are we doing to it? We're bottling it and delivering it. That's the process to transform it. And then finally, taking the final category of different types of business, the government enterprise. Remember, one of our best examples of that is Australia Post. Well, if you think, what have they got coming in? They've got the post itself. Okay, that's the input. They've also got to have set up the factory with conveyor belts to process all that post coming through. They need the delivery vans and postal workers to make sure we got a good service. Okay, here is our labour. Here is our capital. And here, in this case, here's our raw material. Okay, as it's coming in. Now, what are we hopefully going to do with those packages and parcels that are coming through? Well, we're going to sort and deliver them so that you, as a customer, receive your delivered letter on time, okay, and the service you receive. So hopefully you can see all of this come together. We've got our inputs, what's coming in, the processes, what we're transforming them into, and the output we walk away, whether it's a tangible good or a service, or in some cases you can see both. Okay, a question here, putting it all together, so a mega question, but it should be really easy for you. What are the key elements of the operations management system? Yes! Hopefully I've driven this into you by now. So whenever you hear that word elements, the key elements, inputs, process, outputs. Well done. So hopefully here we can see a lovely summary of the key part from this lesson, the key, okay? The key elements. So whenever we hear the word elements, we're talking about inputs, processes, and outputs in our operations system, okay? What are the inputs? They're all those resources that go into making either the good or the services, okay? So it could be the human resources, the labor, the skills, the knowledge, the expertise that's required, okay? Could also be the raw materials, okay? Whatever that may be in terms of what you need, the cocoa beans for the chocolate, the component parts and the facilities and buildings that you require, okay? Do you need a cafe? Do you need a warehouse? Do you need a factory to produce your goods and services? The machinery and equipment to do that for you, the time and the ideas that go into that. So that's all your inputs, what you start with. The process is those transformation activities that convert the input into the output, okay? So you can think of these like you're doing action words. What are we doing to convert the input into the output? And the output, what we walk away with, that final product presented to the customer, either as goods, tangible, we can touch them, or services, intangible, we experience them. Okay, hopefully that will make sense. On to the next lesson, where we're going to look at the characteristics of manufacturing and service businesses.